Hi there, Bill Kenny here with Meet. I hope you're doing well today. And we're here for the webinar Scale Now, Entering the US Market Through Trade Shows and Other in-person events. We really are excited to have you here today. We will have people from all over the world who are interested in this topic on the webinar today. And the U.S. market presents unique challenges for young companies looking to grow quickly, and we want to make sure that we get out this, I think, what will be very valuable information. So please add your questions. There should be a tool to your, probably on the right side of your screen, that will allow you to add any questions. We did have several questions submitted, and we'll get to those. If you haven't been on our webinars before, what we'll do is I'll go off screen and put some slides on. We'll walk through those slides, and then at the end, I'll come back on and we'll answer both the pre-submitted questions and then any additional questions that come. So in any event, we really appreciate you being here, and we're going to hop into the topic right now because we have a lot to get through today and want to make sure we honor your time. So I'm just going to go to share my screens now, or my screen, I should say. And let's try this one more time. Okay, so you should see my screen now. On screen is a slide that says Scale Now, Entering the US Market Through Trade Shows and In-Person Events. So let's hop into our topic. So the idea here is very quickly to be able to help young growth companies scale quickly as they enter the US market. And this is something that can frustrate many companies as they come to the US. It's a huge market. There are many market dynamics. There's lots of competition. There's an abundance of events to choose from, and there's also a tendency for people to go really big, and that can come with its own perils. So we're going to dive in, and hopefully you get a lot out of today. So the questions that were pre-submitted are here. We will get to these at the end, and I think several will be answered as we go through, but we'll want to make sure we'll check in with these to make sure that we get to all of them. And again, feel free to submit additional questions. So our agenda, really straightforward and simple. We're going to do some things that sort of set the table, set the stage for our conversation. We'll talk about some of the common challenges. We'll talk about some key strategies that will help you be much more successful when you come to the US market. And then again, we'll get to your questions. So just a little about me so you have some context to my comments. I've been involved in trade shows and in-person event marketing for the last 30 years. Again, my name's Bill Kenny, and I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Meet. That stands for My Expo and Event Team. And we specialize in helping growth companies and pavilion hosts. So think trade associations and economic development agencies. So we help both growth companies and pavilion hosts effectively exhibit at trade shows. And that's really about creating a steady stream of high quality prospects for those entities. That's what we're all about. And we do that. There are sort of four legs of our service. One is developing the strategy. In other words, choosing the right shows to go to. We provide staff. We also will get the executive speaking opportunities, and then we'll do a whole bunch of different types of sales support, such as appointment setting and competitive intelligence and secret shopping and all sorts of things like that. So if you have additional questions, please let's chat afterwards. The goal here isn't to self-promote, but at least so you understand the context of my comments today. So setting the stage for where we're going is important, just so you have context. And so looking at entering the US market clearly comes with certain risks and certain rewards. On the risk side, or the risk column, entering any new market will dilute the management team's focus as they're having to or needing to spend more of their time and bandwidth on sort of expanded responsibilities. Also, the resources will get diverted from the existing successful market. So any sort of spare resources will go to the new sort of, if you will, promising market. And so another thing that can be a risk for certain companies. And then, of course, there's the reputational risk. If we don't succeed, we can have market risks, we can have investor, partner, and even team risk. We'll lose team members and partners and so on. And so these are, and there are certainly more risks than this, but these are some of the key ones that you want to consider. On the reward side, certainly coming to the U.S., a relatively massive market, and certainly one with lots of revenue and profit opportunity. And so we want to certainly understand that. And then there can be enhanced credibility, and you will certainly build systems that would further your global expansion. So it is definitely a proving ground, and one that can also be a launch pad to many other regions of the world. So the challenge, another kind of key thing here is that there is limited sand in the hourglass. So if you're venture capital backed, or you have investors, um, and you certainly will have staff, all of those have an expiration date. Your team will only stay engaged for so long in a cause to get traction. Certainly, your investors will expire, just like the milk in your refrigerator. The investors have a time limit to their interest in continuing to fund an operation or expansion if it's not succeeding. So, there's not just this sort of need to succeed, but there's also a need to succeed fairly quickly, so that we keep the team intact, and so that we keep the investors engaged. Really, really key. That sand will run out and we'll be in trouble. So, one of the questions we get asked a lot, and again, sort of setting the stage here, is why trade shows? Some people will say, haven't they sort of gone away, or aren't they irrelevant now? And so I'd even expand this to say, why trade shows and why in-person events? And the cool thing about trade shows is, you think about every other marketing dollar that's spent in an organization is, and this is, again, our focus is B2B marketing. So the dollars that are spent in business to business marketing are pretty much 100% aimed at getting face to face with a prospect. And the cool thing about trade shows and other types of in-person events is you are face to face with a prospect. There are inherent challenges with that. In other words, often the prospects aren't labeled for us and they're not pre-identified. So we have to actually do a little bit of work, but we'll talk about that today, and we'll make it much easier. But the cool thing about events is there are people we can interact with, and some of which will be prospects. And so we need to come up with a new system as to how to get the most out of that, because we certainly hear the frustration every day when we talk to customers and prospects and people in the marketplace about how they're not achieving what they need to at trade shows. And we've, I think, developed some pretty cool secret sauce for you. So we're going to go through, we have 6 common challenges that happen as we see people entering the U.S. market. And these are, some of them are transcendent through entering any new market, and in fact, sort of participating in in-person events in general. So it's not 100% just the U.S. market, but certainly these will relate to the U.S. market. So this is 100%. I have yet to have a conversation with a prospect or a current customer that is succinct at describing who their target prospect is, that buyer persona, who they're aiming at. And it's amazing to me. And actually, I shouldn't say that. It's it's what we're finding is that is the norm. And this is a huge challenge because if we don't know what we're aiming at, it's certainly hard as heck to hit it. And what we're going to find is that we're going to waste lots of time, lots of money, lots of resources, lots of heartache, lots of passion towards sort of a vague idea of what a prospect is, which of course will be very inefficient. The idea that we need to bet it all on one sort of big event, and we see people coming to the U.S., sort of because of the media that surrounds our event marketplace, is that they've identified this sort of, and maybe it's something they've seen for years out there in the horizon. Gosh, when we go to the U.S., we'll just go to this huge event, and all will be right with the world, and that will go through this. But that is a huge challenge for a lot of reasons. Number one, it's a lot of money, and two is it's certainly super high risk. And I think we'll share some ideas here that will significantly improve that. There is also often, if we don't know our buyer persona, really poor alignment between where we're aiming or where we should be aiming and actually what we're doing, what our offer is, what our call to action is, what our value proposition is, all those things, and even where we are, what events we're going to, need to be aligned with who we're aiming at. So that alignment certainly is going to be a challenge if it's not correct. Our communication isn't localized, number 4 challenge. In other words, we're not empathic. We're not being able to communicate directly to the people who we're aiming at. And so this could be oral, it could be written communication, it could be our nonverbals, and so on. And so ultimately, not being localized to the population or to the type of buyer that we're aiming at can be a super challenge. This one will seem contrarian, but we'll make sure we go through this. And in fact, our next webinar on May 30th, we're going to dig deep into this issue. And actually, the whole issue is on this one challenge, or I should say the whole webinar is on this one challenge. So if this is a question for you, then please come to that webinar. So having salespeople in the booth, a super challenge. And then ineffective follow-up. The idea that we're waiting for the phone to ring certainly is not cool, and it doesn't work. And so sometimes we create too many prospects. It's the same problem as having ineffective follow-up, because if we create too many prospects, more than we can adequately follow up on, then it's wasted potential energy. And so we want to sort of moderate the flow of prospects so that it's something that we can process in a reasonable amount of time. So ineffective follow-up, number 6. So before we kind of get into the solutions, the first kind of way that we can set the stage here is we want to talk a little bit about fish. And you're probably going, why the heck do we want to talk about fish? Well, fish, as it turns out, are a wonderful metaphor for what we need to do when it comes to successfully not just entering the US market, but really focusing our marketing effort where we are as we enter new markets, and certainly entering the US market. So fish. There's a lot of fish on the screen now. So worldwide, there are about 20,000 species of fish. Yeah, this particular chart is the freshwater fish in North America, of which there are, I believe, around 900 species. So a whole lot of fish. Yeah, it's not easy, right? So when somebody decides that they want to fish, there's a whole lot of fish you could catch. So the first thing that someone that fishes does is they say, well, my goodness, what kind of fish do I want to catch? Maybe I want to catch, and let's stay in fresh water, maybe a catfish. And so, there are unique bait that you're going to use for a catfish. There are unique places that you're going to go fish. There's unique depths of water that you're going to go for catfish. And those are just like the prospects we would have wherever we're marketing. And if we're not really clear about who we're fishing for, we're going to go with the wrong bait. We're going to go in the wrong body of water at the wrong depth with the wrong gear. And guess what? That fish is just going to swim on by. They'll have no idea that we're even trying to relate to them. And so that's going to be a real challenge. So we want to make sure that we have the right bait and we're at the right depth and we're going after the right fish, or else we're going to have this fish reacting to what we have and not sort of not really enjoying the worm we're offering. They want maybe something else. So as you look at the US, you'll see that there are, of all these freshwater fish, there are actually lots of different, regionally, there are lots of different kind of fish that are unique to certain regions. And so this is going to be just the same as if you're marketing, is each region you go to will have certain types of prospects that exist there. So before you come, you really want to make sure that you understand your buyer persona and then target the region that's likely to have the greatest number or the most lucrative or the best key buyer personas for you. And you might even want to do some events before you actually begin a presence here to sort of do some tests and maybe narrow it down to 5 geographies that you might move to, and then specifically do some tests in those areas to see where you're getting the best response. A fisherman knows this, right? They go and they aren't married to one fishing hole. If it's not producing, they move to the next one, they move to the next one, they move to the next one until the fish start biting. And that's exactly what you're doing here. So again, the person fishing has lots of gear, and on a given day they're going to test several different lures. They're going to test different equipment, different poles. These particular lures are just the ones on a given website that are the best bass fishing lures. That's one of 20,000 species of fish. There are so many different pieces of equipment that you might use. And again, different baits attract different fish. So let's get into the specific strategies. And we really want to talk about these because these are, hopefully you're going to find that these are 6 really high leverage strategies that will help you. And ultimately, if we're successful in the way we not just design, but also execute our event strategy, it will inform all of our other marketing. And that's really the goal. We certainly want to create traction through events, but we also want to inform everything else we're doing from a marketing standpoint, make all of our marketing better very quickly. And that's, again, the sand is running out of the hourglass. When we make a decision to go test a new market or to move into a new market, it's in a small window, and we need to execute very strongly within that small window. So first, let's sort of set a US market entry goal. And we want to efficiently build traction. And then second, we want to maximize the probability of success. You remember the risk and reward we talked about earlier. We want to minimize the risk and maximize the opportunity or potential for that reward. So strategy number 1, we want to be really specific and narrow when we determine a buyer persona we're going after. And we may have 2 or 3 buyer personas by product or service. That's totally fine, but we certainly will prioritize those or give some sense in as we go to market in terms of which one or ones in what order we will prioritize because of what we hypothesized in that marketplace. And, as we develop these, buyer personas, this is a hypothesis that we will test, but the hypothesis is based on our knowledge. It's based on research. It's based on talking to customers or prospective customers in the market, maybe partners in the market, but using all of our tools, maybe mentors and so on. But ultimately, we want to develop these buyer personas, certainly based on what we've learned in the markets we're already in and projecting that into the new market we're going to, in this case, the US, and identify who we think will be our best buyers. And so we then want to identify, of course, where to go and what bait to use and so on based on that buyer. And so we want to, we have a choice of multiple roads, but in this case, maybe the road with to the left with storms and lightning and thunder, and to the right with promise and sunshine and all that. And so we want to make sure, as we're thinking about our buyer personas, as we're thinking about who to target, we can't choose a road to take until we've determined that. In other words, we can't choose what events to do. We can't choose what marketing to get ourselves involved in and how, until we choose this buyer persona. Until we've made those decisions, there's absolutely no reason to invest in any marketing, because it'll be wasted. And ultimately, we only have so much time to fish, essentially, and we want to use it really well. And we only have so much resource to fish. So strategy number 2, we want to resist big bets. So, you think of this, as a sort of the first 6 to 12 month plan, and it may extend past then. This is, this is not a one size fits all plan, and so we need to sort of accordion it to make it fit our particular model. But we want to resist the big bets for a whole bunch of different reasons, and we'll go through them here in a second. But we want to make many small, local, and frequent bets. And there are going to be some really cool attributes of doing that. So the first thing to realize is that you landed in this geography for a reason. So you'll see later on, I'll choose Providence, Rhode Island as an example city to locate in. And I'm not favoring Providence, but just to pick one city as an example. So let's say, for example, we chose to locate in Providence, Rhode Island. Then what I will say here is that we should do events that are geographically within driving distance or train distance of Providence, Rhode Island, where we don't have to stay overnight, unless we've got multiple days of meetings or whatnot scheduled there. But we could reasonably get home in the same day. And the idea here is that if there's a lower investment to participation, we can do things much higher frequency, and those are going to be much lower cost events. And one of the things is kind of a neat attribute of the U.S. Is that we have, with every industry and with every discipline, every sort of every type of business, there are many, many associations and organizations. So really, wherever you are in the country, and particularly if you've chosen the right area, there are going to be lots of events that are relevant to you, and ideally your perfect or your best buyer personas. And so that should be part of your research, is sort of what are the associations or chapters of associations that are in the marketplace that where our buyer personas would be. So we've landed in this geography for a reason. We want to build strong intimacy with key groups and chapters. So they're going to do weekly or monthly meetings. We want to be at all of them. We want to create the key relationships. We're going to find partners there. We're going to be able to test so many different things. Each week, each month, we can test new buyer personas. So who we're targeting, we can test specific value propositions. We can test offers. And again, as we learn, as we find what ones get the best reactions, that will change all of our other marketing. If we're doing, other types of marketing, such as even our marketing collateral, if we're doing videos or, even any type of sort of normal, traditional media like print or radio or TV. It will inform every kind of marketing we do. It'll certainly change our website and the call to actions we use in our website. The cool thing about call to actions and response that you get in person is it's far greater than what you'll get online, because we not only sort of get a response, we see the response. We see how people respond to the offer that we give, um, and uh, and and so the data we get and the changes we can make are so great. So let's just imagine we were at one of our trade associations was having a regional 1 day trade show, and this happens all the time in industries here. And so you've driven there, you're set up your booth for a day. In the morning, you're going to have one target buyer persona. All your collateral will be aimed at them, and it'll have your unique value proposition for that buyer persona and a specific offer for them. In the afternoon, you could do one of a few things. You could keep aiming at that same buyer persona, but have a totally different value proposition and a totally different offer. You could also aim at a second or a sort of a B test buyer persona and have their value proposition and a specific offer for them. In either one of those scenarios, you're going to learn a ton. And so the idea here is, though, we can do a lot of things that get a lot of testing in within a single event, and that can be super powerful. And the idea here, of course, is to iterate and evolve quickly. We want to learn from these. We want to track kind of what we're learning, and again, allow that process to work so that we're evolving our marketing really, really quickly. And you see how this is setting us up to go maybe in year two to national events or even global events, with a much higher hit rate, a much better plan, and will be significantly more productive. Besides the fact that we'll have built a great network within our region of people who are also going to these national and global events, and it's even greater leverage. So not only are we going to be better prepared, but we'll have so many cool peers that will make connections for us as well, and chances are through them we'll have made some national and global contacts already, but certainly going to these bigger events, we're going to hit it out of the park, where we would have been really challenged and not had any idea why had we gone there first. And it may not be till the third year that we decide to go to the biggest events. I mean, we shouldn't be in a rush to do that. We moved to a specific geography because we said it has a density of customers. It has a density, there's some key variable here that caused us to move to this place. We ought to leverage that. And so here's the example with, just again, using Providence, Rhode Island as an example. And this is a 100-mile radius or a 160-kilometer radius of Providence. So, not too bad of a 1 day distance. So you can get as far west and south as New Haven, Connecticut. You can actually get out into eastern Long Island. There's a couple of ferries that go across. You can get to Hartford. You can get to Hartford, Connecticut, Springfield, Mass, certainly into Boston. You can get as far north as Concord, New Hampshire, and Manchester, New Hampshire. But you've got several markets, and you're certainly not too far away from New York. And that's from Providence to New York is easy train. It's sort of maybe a 3-hour train ride. So not bad at all. Again, the idea here is, to really conserve capital and to conserve time and to get as much testing done as you possibly can, and ultimately to get as much traction very quickly as you possibly can. All right, so strategy number 3, to create alignment. So we have our persona now. It's getting much more firm in terms of who we should be aiming at, and then we're going to pick the right events. We're going to pick the right associations to be a part of. We're going to develop much better marketing communications. We're going to have offers that are, think of that bait hanging out there for the fish. The offers we're going to have, we want most of the fish to swim by, and only our buyer personas to stop and say, hey, wow, that looks interesting, let me take a nibble. That's that's the ideal type of bait. We don't want general bait. We want specific bait that only our buyers are interested in. And then, of course, we want to get our buyer personas into the appropriate lead nurturing. What will take them from sort of that stage of awareness of us to growing trust and to a place where they need and convert to buying our product. And of course, having the type of follow-up as well that matches the buyer persona that we're aimed at. So what is it that will compel them over time to convert to being a customer? So alignment is key, and we want to line up all of our resources, everything that is prospect facing, to that buyer persona. So what is it that will communicate to them specifically and get them interested and begin the process of converting them to a customer? All those things need to line up, and nearly 100% of the time we see the companies we're talking to, number one, have a challenge in really narrowing down the buyer persona, and then of course lining up all of their marketing elements to that end, to really bring uh, those type of buyers uh, into their portfolio. So we want to localize communication, and this is something that I think for many of us can be a challenge, and it really comes in a couple of forms, and certainly first and foremost it needs to be audience centered, but we need to do this both in terms of how we communicate in writing. This could be on our website, this could be in our marketing collateral, or any type of media that we're in. What is that communication, and are we using terms, and are we even simply spelling it the way that even if it's, for example, in English, our cousins in the UK spell the same words differently in some cases than we do. And so if you're in the UK and the US, when you type or print color, we would say COLOR, and they would say COLOUR. And it's the same exact word. It means the same exact thing, but we spell it differently. And if there are going to be some buyers in the U.S. that would have a hard time sort of understanding words that aren't sort of how we spell them. And so making those types of communications are really key. And of course, making sure our team is localized. In other words, either they are from the U.S. or that they have a lot of experience at communicating in the U.S., and so that they understand our customs and can speak and whether it's sarcasm or any other types of communication techniques that would allow them to build relationships more quickly with individuals that they're relating to. These are all things that having local communicators that it can really help. So strategy number 5, this is a huge one. And again, we've got a full webinar on this particular topic in just a few days. But the idea of removing salespeople from the booth, we want to use them much better than they're currently being used. And right now, the salespeople, the biggest anti-sponsor of trade shows. When I talk to salespeople who do a lot of trade shows, they are the largest anti-sponsor of doing trade shows because of how they're asked to perform. They're asked to be in the booth, and they're sitting there and they're talking to so many people who aren't qualified, who aren't prospects, and those people are wasting their time. And salespeople and the technical salespeople tend to need to sort of show how smart they are. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but they tend to talk about their product a lot. And so that can waste a lot of time. They ask a lot of qualifying questions and things like that. It wastes a lot of time in a booth. And so we're going to just kind of back up for a second here and make sure that we sort of set a little bit of framework. So the purpose of a booth is very simple. It's to identify volumes of quality prospects. There is, and there may be at times a different purpose for a booth, but in most situations, most lead generation exhibiting opportunities, the single goal of the booth is to identify volumes of quality prospects. So we need to agree on what a prospect is. And this is, I'm not looking to be at all condescending, but if we're going to aim at something specifically, we need to agree on what it is. So a prospect has three qualities. A prospect has to have a need, and this is, they need to perceive the need. It's not important that you perceive it. It's important that they perceive it, or else they're not going to take action. They need to certainly have the resource to satisfy that need. And finally, they need to be urgent. They need to be urgent for a solution. They may have need and they may have money, but if they're not urgent, they're certainly not going to convert. And so we need to assure ourselves that they have those three qualities before we put them in the prospect column. They may be a suspect or they may be a prospect in 2 years. But what we want when we leave a trade show is to know who's a prospect now. Of the 10,000 attendees or the 100,000 attendees, we want to know the 50 or the 100 or 200 that are prospects. That's all we want the trade show to do. If we know that, then the trade show is hugely successful for us. And it's not about having 200 cards. It's about having 200 prospects. That's a totally different concept. So the goal of the booth then is to separate the prospects from the general attendees. And so think of it like a sift, where we're, sifting through all of these prospects. We're shifting the sand around until the, certain grains of a certain size fall through our screen. And those are our nuggets that we want to keep. And maybe even think about it as gold is the gold is what remains, right? And so we're letting all of the things we don't want fall through the screen, and the gold remains on the top of the sift or in our screen. And so again, the whole goal is we want to find the prospects, and those need to get separated. So again, it wouldn't be unusual in a trade show with 10,000 people for there to be only 50 or maybe 100 or 150 prospects for any given company. Again, they need to have a need. They need to have money, in other words, budget, and they also need to be urgent. And so let's just do a little bit of booth math so that what I'm talking about maybe makes a little more sense. So what we've found over years of doing this is that a salesperson, normally a normal conversation with a salesperson in a booth is at least 15 minutes. So let's just say that, this is an overestimation. Let's just say that there's an 8-hour day in the booth, and this is not giving the person any break whatsoever, which is a little unrealistic. But there are 8 hours in the booth, 15 minutes. The most conversations that a salesperson can have in a booth is going to be 32. And so that, on a percent basis, again, let's take a trade show with 10,000, which isn't a very large trade show, 10,000 people, then they're only going to talk to 32 people. If it's a couple days, they might get to 100. If it's 3 days, they might just get to 100, which on a percent basis, that's 1%. Not very good. On the other hand, people who are, instead of being salespeople and subject matter experts, if they're engagement professionals, then they're going to have somewhere around a conversation every 2 minutes. Those are 1 to 2 minute conversations. And over an 8-hour day, they're going to have at least 240 conversations. That's nearly 8 times the number of conversations that the salespeople will have, and it's actually probably more like 8 to 12 times. And so again, the goal here isn't to have long conversations. It's merely to sift through the sand to find the gold. And so we want to prosecute as many buckets of sand as we can. That's the whole idea. We want to sift through as much as possible. So the engagement people, the engagement professionals, will get through many more. Now, what do we want to do with the salespeople? the key here is we want to use the right bait, of course, to get people in and understanding that. And we actually did a webinar on this, and anyone that's interested in exactly how to do that, let me know and I'll send you the link for that, or you can go to our YouTube channel and get that link. But it was all about booth bait, and this was our last webinar actually. So on May 31st, we're going to do this next webinar, which is on why your salespeople should never be in your booth. So we're going to talk there about where your salespeople should be. They're still at the trade show, but they're going to be doing something that is much, 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 much more valuable. And in fact, you'll close more sales and you'll move things along much quicker if we get the salespeople engaged in other activities and get them out of the booth where this is not their area of productivity. Their area of productivity would be used in a much better way in another location. So join us on May 31st for that, please. So strategy number 6. Prospects that we get from a trade show or any in-person event are just like produce. They spoil. They're going to, after a couple days, they're going to rot, and we don't want that to happen, because that's wasted energy, right? We went in, invested our time and energy into going to these events, and then the leads that we get just sit on the shelf and essentially never get consumed. And we want that. We want to make sure that our time is efficiently spent. Obviously we want to grow only what we can pursue. And so another big issue with going to major events is you might come home with, and I wouldn't necessarily even call them prospects, because most people will come home with a stack of cards that are very unqualified, but they're going to come home with maybe even 1,000 cards from a several day event, and from the whole team and so on. And it's almost like spiking your body with lots of sugar. You have this huge, maybe you can follow up on a couple hundred of them, but the rest will just get wasted. You won't, after a month or so, you'll just sort of put them aside and not having followed up on a majority of them. And maybe you put them into your email newsletter or something like that list, but in terms of good follow-up, it's just wasted time. And so this is a whole nother argument until you scale of why not to go to big events, is because you get these spikes of leads as opposed to a much smoother level of leads that you can process and onboard much more successfully and more easily, and something that doesn't shock your system, but something that actually fits really well and allows you a much smoother and logical growth. So follow up. Yeah, that's what it's all about. So this is kind of an old statistic. Maybe some of you have seen it before, but I think it still holds true, and that is 2% of sales are made on the first follow-up, 3% are made on the second, and then it goes all the way down to 80% of sales are made on the 5th to the 12th contact. This is what I normally find. Maybe not exactly these stats, but something fairly close to this. And I think the other part of this is really interesting, in that 48% of salespeople never follow up with a prospect. So think about it. You're differentiating yourself just by following up. So make sure you do. And follow up by phone if you can. Certainly emails a second alternative. Meeting with people on Skype or any form is just great. And moving from being 2-dimensional to being 3-dimensional in our relationships. And then many salespeople stop after the second contact, and only 12% of salespeople make more than 3 contacts. So again, you can differentiate yourself exceptionally well. Number one, by following up, but then 2, by following up multiple times. And again, people are empowered to say no. If the people that you're following up with aren't saying no, then it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a no. It just means that they may be busy, Or maybe they're not urgent. I mean, that's a whole nother possibility, in which case they may not be a prospect yet, which is totally fine. The maybe is the worst answer you can get. Yes or no are always the best when you're selling, for sure. So again, our goal here today was to identify some sort of key strategies for lighting a fire sort of under your entry into the US market. And hopefully you found some of this information interesting and compelling. As I mentioned, and I apologize, I've got two different dates here. I will confirm the date and back to you all in email. I apologize. It's either May 30th or 31st. I think it's actually the 30th, but I'll confirm it in email later today. But the webinar is called "Why Your Salespeople Should Never Be in Your Booth: How to Create uh, how to really create leverage." And that's the goal, is to make sure that you're getting the salespeople into high productive opportunities, while many prospects, many customers are all in the same place. And if they're stuck in the booth, it's not going to work well. So we're going to get to your questions. I want to make sure that you have my contact information. You've certainly seen emails from me. My phone number, please feel free to call anytime. Any questions are totally fine. I will follow up with a recording of this webinar and certainly invite you to chat. Love to learn more about your goals and what you're doing, and whether you're helping companies come to the US or you are in fact coming to the US. Certainly happy to talk about that with you. So I'm going to come back on screen here and we'll answer your questions. So hopefully you can see me now, but let's hop into these questions. So excuse me. So the first question is, which events to go to and what investment leads to the bigger ROI? And so, all of our effort in terms of choosing events should center on the buyer personas that we are, or buyer persona that we are aiming our marketing at, and who we found our best return on investment will come from. Once we've got that buyer persona, actually identifying and choosing the events is much easier. And so what we typically do is do a lot of research around those buyer personas and then find the events that they go to. We interview people who we know who match that buyer persona and find out where they go, what events they find most productive. But we use a variety of techniques to identify what events are possible, and then we rate them. We actually have a webinar on this, how our whole system and how we do this. But then we rate those opportunities and then choose the ones that come out highest rated. And we refresh that information once a quarter, because the events field is dynamic. The associations and their events, and then certainly the national and global events. There are always new ones coming up. There are always new opportunities. And we haven't even talked about doing executive briefings or partner type events and hospitality events and so on, that you would be a part of, possibly producing or co-producing or co-facilitating and so on. There are lots of opportunities here, and again, that's why it gets so confusing, and that's why we've really put a system to this, because we want to not only make good decisions, but we want those decisions to get better and better and better over time, that our marketing time and resource is being spent progressively more efficiently and effectively. So the second question is, how do we attract the right people to the booth? Yeah, totally good question. So you remember we talked about fish. So we want to make sure we've, now that the fish that we've identified that we're going to be trying to attract during this particular event has a particular bait. Think about it as if there was something that's keeping them up at night. So if you thought about your ideal buyer, that buyer persona that you're aiming at, that person or profile of person has probably one or two or three things that are keeping them awake at night. And so your offer, needs to relate to that pain. And there may be a couple other ways to do this, but this is the most effective way that we found. So what might an offer be? It could be an offer of a webinar that will address that particular challenge. It might be a white paper. It could be an assessment around that issue. There are lots of techniques here, but ultimately the offer, if it's done right, is something that, if you think of your booth, think of it as being empty or mostly empty except for the offer, because everything else that's in your booth will distract the fish from the bait, right? So you want to make it real easy. And so if you think about a busy trade show, and that roughly half the people walking through are introverts, it's hard to catch people's attention. So the more stuff that you put in the way of catching their attention, the less likely they are to see what you actually want them to see. So you might have shirts printed with your offer, so that your personnel walking around the trade show have the offer as well. You might certainly have it big within your booth in terms of what your offer is. And think of a billboard: very few words, big images, make it easy for people to jump in and say, wow, I have that problem. This is content that I need, and get them. Your only goal is to get them to opt in. And again, you want 99 point something percent of people to walk by, and that only, the fish that you're going after that wide mouth bass, you want them to stop and say, oh, this bait is for me, I'm going to stop. So that's the way you attract people to your booth. Again, happy to talk more directly about this with anyone, and we build these strategies for companies, and actually execute them as well. So there are so many trade shows in our industry. How do you pick the right one? Well, I apologize, I didn't reorder these, or this particular one. I should have. This is really, it's very similar to the first one. Again, it starts with the buyer persona, and then narrowing down which ones that particular persona would be most likely at, and the ones that would be most efficient for you to be there. And so, it's not just even finding the best shows. You have to do the sort of the best events with respect to your calendar. Again, the goal isn't to create lots of events or lots of leads in the first quarter, and then none in the second quarter, and then lots of leads in the third quarter and none in the fourth. We need revenue year round, and we need new customers year round. Unless you have a seasonal service or product, most of us need new revenue, new customers year round. So the next question is, and actually this question, we have a misspelling. So what's the most cost-effective way to build a booth, not both, a booth for a show, and be able to reuse it in different US cities? Yeah, actually happy to talk about this in more detail offline, but we found some booth vendors and systems that are really cost efficient, and travel well and store well. So a lot of the costs around booths actually is it's actually less in the setup and exhibiting, and more so in the storage and care. And so having systems that it's very easy to change your messaging, and all those types of things are really important, so that your shipping costs are lower, your ability to convert it into new messaging is easy, all that. So yeah, we've looked into all this, and certainly happy to share some of what we learned. Again, probably easiest to do this offline, because there's a fair amount of detail to it, and probably some good questions I should ask in order to really understand what you're looking to do. But let's chat more about that offline. So let's see. And are there services to facilitate this process? So the process of selecting events, in terms of identifying the buyer personas, in terms of staffing trade shows, and all that. Yeah, that's actually something we do. About half of our customers are external to the U.S. and coming to the U.S. market, or in the U.S. market, and the other half are in the U.S. and growing here, and then and growing out to other countries. So this is something we specialize in, and certainly glad to chat more with anyone who's interested in learning about what we do and see if there's a fit for what you need, or maybe what some of the companies that you work with need. We'd certainly be glad to have that conversation. So I don't see any additional questions, and I'm going to wait for just a moment, see if anybody types in another question. But please feel free to toss in another question. Um, I don't see anyone typing, so I'm going to assume that we're good for now. And I really do appreciate you all being a part of the webinar today. Again, I'll follow up with a link to this webinar recording today and the information for our next webinar, so that I narrow down so that we're either on the 30th or 31st. I think it's the 30th, but we'll get the right date for you. And then certainly I'd love to have one-on-one chats with anyone that would like to learn more about what we're doing, see if there's a match for your organization or your portfolio companies or anything of that nature. But again, thanks so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and it's been a real pleasure being with you today. Thanks a bunch. Bye for now.